My son drained my bank account, took his wife and her mother to Rome, and I simply smiled. 3 days later he called, voice cracking through the line. Mom, what did you do? That was the moment my retribution was complete. The day I needed to breathe the most became the day my own son stole every dollar I had without a note, without remorse. Eleanor Ellie Price sat frozen in her old, faded armchair, the one she'd bought when Jackson turned 7, using the first decent paycheck she earned cleaning houses in the Hollywood Hills. The phone's glow painted her tired face while a single notification pulsed on the screen. Available, balance, $0. She read it once, then, again, and again, until the numbers blurred. Her hands trembled not from age, though she was 68, but from the deep, sick twist that comes when the mind understands and the heart refuses. She called the bank. A robot answered first, then a weary human voice. The representative spoke of online wire transfers, large amounts, totals over $80,000, her entire life's work on. Ellie's voice cracked. And where did it go? To an account under the name Jackson Arthur Price. The executive replied, detached, mechanical. Ma'am, would you like to file a fraud report? Ellie said nothing. She hung up. Silence filled the little house. Only the kitchen clock ticked, and a dying fluorescent bulb buzzed overhead. Outside, an ice cream truck wandered down the street, its cheerful song mocking the void that had opened inside her. Then the landline rang, the old one she kept out of habit. Hello, she said, flat and hollow. Ellie, honey, did you see your Jackson's Instagram? It was Doris, her neighbor, breathless with gossip. He's in Rome, eating fancy food with his wife and her mama. They look like movie stars. Ellie swallowed hard, feeling her soul drift somewhere far away. She walked to her bedroom, opened the drawer where her old smartphone waited, and searched her son's profile. She wasn't one for social media, but she followed him from a distance, the way one peers through glass at a life no longer theirs. There he was, Jackson, her only son, the boy she had brought into the world through pain and raised alone after his father left for another woman, the son she'd given everything to, her youth, her strength, even the family land her parents had left her so he could go to college. On the screen he smiled, wine glass raised, white shirt gleaming. Beside him stood Tanya, his wife, and Rhonda, the mother-in-law who'd never hidden her disdain for Ellie. The caption read, Rome, my new beginning. I deserve this. In the comments, Tanya had written, good things come to those who wait. Thanks for everything, Mama. Ellie didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply stood there, holding the phone like a burning brick. And then she smiled, a small, strange smile. The kind born not of joy but of revelation. Far away, in Rome, under a dull sky, Jackson raised his glass without guilt. See, Tanya said, sipping her wine, it was a good idea to take the money. She's old. Better we use it before it goes to hospital bills. Rhonda laughed, sharp and cruel. That clueless old woman doesn't even know what a plane looks like. She'd have wasted it anyway. Jackson said nothing. He stared at the Colosseum, eyes bright but uneasy. Somewhere inside, something stirred memories of hunger, of his mother whispering, hold on, baby, we'll have it tomorrow. That night, the walls of Ellie's house seemed older. Everything sat where it always had, yet nothing felt the same. On the shelf stood a lifetime photographs of Jackson in every stage of growing up. There he was, grinning in his preschool uniform, then taller, in his middle school blazer, and finally, proud and radiant. The day he received his college diploma. Everything Ellie Price had ever done was for him. At 18, she sold her engagement ring to pay for his last year of high school. At 23, she handed him the deed to the family land her father had left her. At 30, she scraped together what she could for his wedding. Though Tanya never hid her disdain, Ellie had cooked for him, washed his clothes, cleaned the messes he left behind. But with each act of love, he drifted further away. Mom, you don't understand this world, he would say, half impatient, half condescending. Things aren't done the old way anymore. Tanya and we've got big plans. You'll always be in my heart, Mama, but you can't be tied to me forever. A week before the betrayal, Ellie had gone to visit Jackson at his Studio City apartment. She carried a tray of her famous fried chicken and collard greens, still warm from her kitchen. She rang the bell. No answer. She waited 2 hours on the bench outside, the afternoon sun pressing down on her shoulders. Finally, the doorman approached. Are you looking for Mr. Jackson Price? Yes, Ellie said softly. I'm his mother. The man hesitated, then lowered his gaze. I was instructed not to let you in if you come unannounced. Ellie's throat tightened. And why is that? I couldn't tell you, ma'am, he replied quietly. That's what they told me. She didn't take the bus home. She walked through the city, through the heat, through the ache. She wanted the dirty air on her face, the weight of every breath to remind her she was still alive. With each step, she thought of the meals she had skipped, the long hours cleaning houses, every penny she had saved for the boy who now wanted nothing to do with her. That evening, Doris came by with pecan pie and coffee. You've always been strong, Ellie, she said gently. Don't let this break you. Jackson's young heel, come to his senses. Ellie looked out the window, her eyes distant. Do you think children ever regret it, Doris? Yes, Dora said quickly. Of course they do. When their mother's gone, that's when they realize. Ellie nodded slowly. Well, I just hope it's not too late when he does. Doris leaned forward. And what are you going to do now? Ellie met her gaze. Something hard flickered behind her calm eyes. I'm going to smile, she said simply. Smile. Doris frowned. What do you mean? I've cried enough, Doris. Now I'll smile in silence because I have nothing left to lose. And when a woman has nothing left to lose, she paused. She becomes dangerous. Meanwhile, the night was falling in Rome. Jackson stepped out of the shower and heard Tanya's voice through the balcony doors. She was speaking on the phone, low but clear. Yes, we did it. The old woman never suspected a thing. The money's here. Tomorrow we'll open the account in Spain and then we get rid of Jackson. Yes, of course, he thinks we're in this together. Such a fool. Jackson froze. The water on his skin turned cold. He didn't move, didn't speak. He walked back to the room as if nothing had happened. Tanya was in bed, eyes closed, pretending to sleep. He lay beside her, silent. Something inside him cracked, though he didn't yet know that this was only the beginning. Back in South Central Los Angeles, Ellie prepared a cup of chamomile tea. The night was heavy, thick with humidity. Outside, dogs fought over torn trash bags. Inside, her old lamp flickered against peeling walls. She opened her recipe notebook, the one filled with dishes she'd never had time to cook, and began to write in her shaky hand. This is not the end. It is the beginning of my silence, and my silence will hurt more than any scream. She closed the notebook, placed it on the nightstand, and lay down. For the first time in years, she slept without tears. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Jackson lay in a luxury suite, scrolling through his phone. A notification appeared, account blocked due to suspicious activity. What? He muttered, staring at the screen. The first crack had formed. He didn't know it yet, but his motherquiet.com, an unseen, had already begun to move. Sometimes, pain doesn't scream. Sometimes, pain watches, and it waits until the moment it can strike. Dawn broke over South Central. Sticky air clung to the tin roofs and broken sidewalks. Ellie rose slowly, her joints creaking. But this morning, for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel old. Something unfamiliar stirred inside her. It wasn't fury, nor grief. It was a steadiness she had never met within herself. While the kettle hissed on the gas stove, Ellie fixed her eyes on the blue flame. The whistle dragged her mind years back, to the first morning she understood what it meant to be completely alone. She had been 14, scrubbing floors in the white houses of Brentwood, a thin girl with uneven braids, skin roughened by cheap soap, hands always cracked and stinging. At that age, she already knew every brand of stain remover, every trick to keep a man's shirts from creasing. When she came home at night, her mother was asleep, worn out from her own shift. Her father had run off long ago with a woman from a bar. Ellie didn't cry. She simply swallowed hard, woke before dawn, and went back to work. At 17, she got pregnant with Jackson. His father, a boy barely 3 years older, swore he'd marry her, that he'd save her from the life she hated. They lasted 8 months. The day he learned the baby was a boy, he vanished with a woman who sold cosmetics. Ellie didn't cry then either. She tied her scarf tighter, clenched her jaw, and went back to cleaning other people's houses. She raised Jackson on her back, sometimes literally carrying him from one laundry to another, while she washed strangers' clothes. When he was old enough to toddle, she gave him detergent caps to roll like toy cars. They had no toys, but they had stories. No refrigerator, but always soupy. No television, but songs that carried him to sleep. He became her reason for every sunrise. When Jackson turned 6, one of Ellie's clients offered to pay for his schooling. a private academy, if she agreed to work full-time and live on-site. Ellie didn't hesitate. She moved into a tiny room above the family's garage and crossed the city each weekend to see her boy. She never arrived empty. Sometimes it was a new notebook, other times just a small treat. Always her heart, ready to listen to whatever her son wanted to tell her. Years slipped away, and Jackson grew tall. Ellie taught herself to sign her name, hand trembling, so she could appear as his guardian on school papers. She learned to read prescriptions, then bank statements. She couldn't write much, but she could no longer be deceived, or so she believed. At 16, Jackson promised her mom, "When I make it big, the first thing I'll do is buy you a house where the cold can't get in." Ellie smiled and answered, "Don't buy me anything, son, just don't forget me." Then came college. To pay the fees, she sold the only thing her father had ever left her, a patch of land in rural Georgia, where she once dreamed of building a small cabin. She sold it for less than half its worth, but she never hesitated. "My boy's going to be an accountant," she'd tell the neighbors proudly. "He's going to rise above this life." He did rise, though, not in the way she imagined. By his third semester, Jackson met Tanya. Straight hair, perfect nails, and a smile that belonged on magazine covers. The first time Ellie saw her, something in her chest tightened, not out of envy, but recognition, the kind of woman who only knew how to take, never to give. Tanya came from a family that lived on borrowed appearances. Her mother, Rhonda, wore counterfeit designer handbags and spoke with an accent she didn't earn. The first time they visited Ellie's home, Rhonda let her eyes wander over the chipped paint and narrow kitchen. "What a lovely color," she said finally, her voice thin with mockery. "The walls are so rustic." And Tanya, whispering as if Ellie couldn't hear, murmured, "I don't know how Jackson grew up here. This looks like a shelter, not a home." Ellie smiled, the way she always did, gently, politely, but something deep within her cracked. Over time, Tanya took more space. First, she asked that Ellie not visit so often. Then she insisted Ellie shouldn't offer opinions on their plans. Later, she said Ellie shouldn't attend certain events that she didn't quite fit in. Jackson, caught between love and loyalty, began to drift quietly, almost imperceptibly, until his mother's voice was little more than an echo in his life. One evening, already living with Tanya, Jackson showed up at his mother's door. It would be the last time he ever came without calling first. Ellie had spent all afternoon cooking pot roast and gravy, his favorite meal. The smell filled the tiny house, a warmth she hadn't felt in months. Jackson began, his tone awkward, eyes fixed on the food instead of her face. "Tanya says you're too involved in our lives. She thinks you don't let us grow as a couple." Ellie folded her hands on the table and said softly, "I just want you to be happy, son." He sighed. "I don't need you to take care of me anymore," he said, as if that would wound her less than a slap. She didn't argue. She simply nodded, stood up, and cleared the table in silence. "Take the rest of the roast with you," she said, handing him the foil-wrapped leftovers. He left soon after, and Ellie stood by the window long after his car disappeared, her reflection the only thing left in the glass. The months that followed were a slow unraveling. Tanya began handling Jackson's finances, convincing him to change accounts, to modernize his life. She told him his mother wouldn't understand, that Ellie was too simple for the kind of life they were building. Jackson, caught between guilt and pride, stopped questioning her. Ellie, however, noticed things: a missing bank statement, a new insurance policy she hadn't approved, numbers on a slip that didn't add up. Something was wrong. That's when she decided to visit Walter, her first love from decades ago. He had once lived next door, a kind boy who grew up to become a quiet lawyer. Surrounded by dusty books and unfiled memories, she went to his apartment one afternoon with a small stack of papers. "Walter," she asked carefully, "how can I find out if someone's been using my name for things I didn't do?" He studied her face. "Ellie, are you in trouble?" She shook her head. "No. But I think my son isn't my son anymore." Walter spent weeks combing through the documents. Then one night, he called her to his home. "Ellie," he said gravely, "your son listed you as guarantor on a joint account. You didn't sign it, but your signature's there." Her breath caught. "But I barely know how to write my own name." He looked down. "They forged it, and they've been withdrawing money little by little, for 6 months. Ellie didn't weep or curse. She just gathered the papers, tucked them neatly into her purse, and left. That night, sleep never came. not because of the money, but because of what it revealed. Her son hadn't just been deceived, he had participated. He had robbed his own mother. A week later, Tanya and Rhonda were planning a trip to Rome. Jackson, unemployed but too proud to admit it, sold his car, and then suggested they use his mother's savings. "It's family money," Tanya said sweetly. "Besides, your mother won't ever use it." "Don't be silly." Jackson hesitated. "It's everything she has. And why is she hoarding it?" Tanya shot back. "You're her son. You're not stealing, just borrowing early." He wanted to believe her. That night, sitting in front of his computer, Jackson made the transfer. $80,000, gone in seconds. He didn't pause. He didn't look back. The next morning, Ellie found out. Her account was empty. She didn't scream. She didn't even sit down. She simply opened her worn notebook and wrote, "My son didn't die, but the mother and me did." From that day forward, something shifted. Her body still carried the weight of age, but her spirit turned sharp as glass. She walked differently. Her eyes no longer trembled when she spoke. She began making quiet calls, checking records, visiting offices, tracing every step of what had been taken. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Jackson strolled the cobblestone streets of Rome, believing he had won something, freedom, perhaps. But in south-central Los Angeles, his mother was already weaving the web that would take everything back, and Tanya was planning her escape, whispering over late-night phone calls about accounts in Spain, about leaving Jackson behind. What Jackson didn't yet know was that the woman he had betrayed no longer existed. Ellie Price, the gentle, patient mother, was gone. In her place lived something far older and stronger, a wounded mother who had woken up. And when a wounded mother awakens, there is no hell she won't walk through. The betrayal no longer burned. What scorched her now was the realization that she had been invisible, used, erased, forgotten. But Ellie Price was not going to disappear quietly, because what mothers keep silent about can destroy more than any scream ever could. And from that night onward, Ellie said nothing. Not that time, not the next, not the one after. Her silence was no longer the kind that bleeds. It was the kind that plans. It was no longer the silence of grief. It was the silence of calculation, a sharp, deliberate quiet that watched, measured, and waited. The words that once rose easily from her throat now felt foreign, meaningless, because when a mother realizes she's been replaced, not by another woman, but by a mask, she no longer screams. She changes shape. Ellie Price transformed quietly. Jackson never saw it, or maybe he simply refused to. He was too enamored with his new life, one that no longer smelled of soap and morning coffee, one where the familiar "my baby boy" had been replaced by the polite, distant "sir." Tanya had stepped into that world like she'd been rehearsing for it all her life. She didn't enter Jackson's life, she occupied it, and Jackson, dazzled, handed her the keys without even realizing it. He adored her Polish, the way she spoke with words Ellie never used, the way her perfume filled every room before she did, the way she carried herself, like everything around her, was already hers. But beneath the charm, Tanya was a machine, beautiful, precise, and utterly cold. She knew what she wanted, a name, a bank account, and a man who could fund her ambition. The first cuts came hidden behind jokes. "Honey," she said once, painting her nails in the living room, "why does your mother have to comment on everything? I don't want our child growing up around poverty-level thinking." Jackson chuckled awkwardly. "She's not trying to control us. It's just hard for her to let go." Tanya smiled, that thin, sharp smile that never reached her eyes. "It's not control. It's pity disguised as love. Women like your mother think being single moms makes them saints, but really, it just keeps them stuck in the past. I don't want that energy around us, or around our kids." From that day forward, she began to draw invisible lines around Ellie. At first, it was, "We're busy, maybe next weekend." Then, "Let's meet at a restaurant instead. Your neighborhood makes me nervous." And finally, "I just don't feel comfortable in her house. It smells old." Jackson agreed every time. And when Ellie, still hopeful, asked why they didn't visit like before, he lowered his gaze and mumbled, "It's just, work, Mom. You know how it is, wedding stuff." Ellie nodded, but her eyes, once soft and trusting, had begun to sharpen. She wasn't naive anymore. She was noticing each excuse, each missing call, each shadow of distance growing wider between them. Then came Rhonda, Tanya's mother, the kind of woman who could wound you with a smile. She never insulted Ellie outright. Her words were dipped in sugar and served with a polite tone that cut deeper than any curse. "Miss Eleanor," she said one afternoon, stirring her tea. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but have you ever thought about moving somewhere nicer? You know, this area isn't very safe for an older lady. With the money you've saved, you could buy something better, right? Ellie met her eyes and didn't blink. She said nothing, but inside, something cracked. That's when she understood. It wasn't that they wanted her to move far away. It was that they never wanted her close. Weeks later, during a Sunday lunch Tanya had organized, Ellie finally decided to speak. She waited patiently until Rhonda excused herself to the restroom and Tanya became absorbed in her phone. She looked at her son. Her voice was calm, steady, but there was steel beneath it. Son, she said softly, are you sure this woman is right for you? Have you noticed how she looks at you when you're not looking? How she talks about me? Jackson froze. Tanya's head lifted from her phone. Rhonda reappeared in the doorway, and suddenly, the room felt heavy, like air before a storm. Then Jackson's temper broke. Enough, Mom. You're jealous. You can't stand that I have someone else in my life. You never could. Ellie didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She only lowered her eyes to her plate, set her fork down gently. And in that silence, the sharp, deliberate silence, she knew she had lost him completely. When she returned home, she slipped off her shoes quietly, as if not to disturb anyone, even though there was no one left to disturb. She sat on her bed and tried to remember the last time her son had said I love you without being prompted. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't. That memory, like the son she once knew, was gone. The weeks that followed wore a mask of ordinary days but felt like a slow-burning furnace. Tanya and Rhonda became fixtures at Jackson's office, bringing lunches, discussing business, and planting the language of investments into his ears. One afternoon, casual as a caress, Tanya asked for access to his account to better organize household expenses. Trust me, she said, unbuttoning a shirt in front of him, as if seduction could seal the deal. Are we not a team? Jackson, torn between desire and poor judgment, agreed. Again. Ellie, however, would not sit idle. She suspected something, but suspicion was no substitute for evidence, so she turned to Brenda, a retired accountant who'd spent 2 decades with a pharmaceutical firm and now tutored the neighborhood kids in sums and ledgers. Brenda, Ellie said, I need you to show me how to tell if someone's been messing with my accounts. Brenda frowned. Your son? Ellie nodded. The statements don't come to me anymore. Transfers happened that I didn't make. I don't even know how to do them. Night after night, Brenda sat with her and taught her the bank portal, how to log in on the phone, how to read transaction lists, how to spot deposits and withdrawals. The first time Ellie scrolled through the entries, the floor seemed to tilt. There were large sums, recent dates, transfers that lined up suspiciously with days Jackson visited or asked for paperwork. Money vanished without explanation. He asked me for it, said it was for insurance. Ellie whispered. Brenda's voice was flat. Ellie, that's not paperwork. That's theft. Her heart splintered, but she didn't cry. She fetched a notebook and began to catalog everything: date, time, amount, assigning a name to every missing dollar. Then Brenda pointed to a particular line. See this? They activated a joint account and signed your name. That signature isn't yours. It's a crude copy. Ellie touched the screen, as if it were a fresh wound. They hadn't even bothered to hide it. What are you going to do? Brenda asked. Ellie closed the phone and exhaled. Nothing. Not yet. In Rome. Jackson's unease grew not from conscience, but because Tanya's attention had shifted. She no longer kissed him with the same heat. She laughed at messages alone. Rhonda stopped pretending to tolerate him. One night, while Jackson pretended to sleep, he overheard a whispered conversation. It's done, Tanya said. Why keep pretending? When we get back, we'll sell everything and leave him behind. If he notices, what then? Rhonda asked. He's slow. He won't even know. And if he does, so what? The old woman will die anyway. Who will defend him? Back in South Central, Ellie began to move with a precision that looked ordinary from the outside. She went to the bank, requested full statements, printed each page, and filed them into envelopes. She visited the public registry to search for any properties tied to her name she hadn't authorized. There she found something worse. Jackson had tried to register her house as shared property using forged documents. He'd failed only because of a technical error. She did not go home immediately. Instead, she walked to the small, battered church behind the neighborhood, not to pray, but to sit on a bench and look at the altar. Give me patience, she thought, not to forgive him, but to keep from destroying him with her own hands. Silence wrapped the church around her like a shawl. When she returned, she turned on the radio and let an old blues tune fill the room. She picked up her knitting needles, but the stitches she made were not meant to clothe. She was stitching a plan. The seeds of ingratitude had already been sown. Ellie felt them sprout. The harvest was near. She felt it in her bones, in the draft that slipped through the cracked door, as if the wind itself carried a warning that what had been buried in quiet would soon put forth its roots. Pre-dawn. Hours no longer weighed her down. The cold did not bother her. She began to count days, not with panic, but with strategy. Each morning a measured step, each gesture practiced like the slow sharpening of a blade, held until the precise moment it would be needed. That morning, the house felt heavier than usual. The air was still, thick with dust and memory. Ellie swept the living room with the same straw broom she had used for years, its bristles worn and frayed like the ends of her patience. When she moved the old armchair to clean underneath, she found the usual cluttered dust, paper scraps, a dead pen, but something else caught her eye. A crumpled white envelope, badly folded, tucked into a recycled plastic bag. She almost threw it away. Almost. But a sudden, instinctive pull stopped her hand. She opened the bag. Inside was a document. She read it once, then again, the words refusing to make sense. Her name, her address, a signature that looked too much like hers. Then she reached the header: last will and testament. Her chest tightened. She sat down right there on the floor, spreading the document across her knees. It declared that she had bequeathed her house and savings to Jackson in the event of her death, signed, sealed, and witnessed. The signature at the bottom wasn't hers. It was a theft of identity, of breath, of everything she had ever worked for. The silence in the house grew unbearable. Only the ticking of the clock and a distant dog's bark cut through it. She didn't cry. The tears had left her long ago. What broke this time wasn't her heart, it was her last thread of disbelief. She reached for her phone. Walter, come over. What's wrong? I found what you needed to see. 2 hours later, Walter sat at her kitchen table. The document spread open before him. He read it twice, then a third time, shaking his head. This isn't just fraud, Ellie. It's a loaded weapon. If he had filed this, you'd have lost everything without ever knowing. You think it was him? Walter stayed silent. He laid the papers flat, careful not to touch her forged signature. You didn't draft this. You've never written a legal document in your life. This is someone else's work. The worst part is it's a draft. If there's a draft, there might be an official version somewhere. Ellie looked down at her hands, wrinkled, calloused, still steady. She remembered the day she'd made her last mortgage payment. 30 years of sacrifice, cheap meals reheated over and over, shoes worn past repair, cleaning other people's homes, swallowing insults from bosses who thought kindness was weakness, all so she could have a piece of ground that belonged to her. He wanted to kill me on paper, she said quietly. Walter lifted his eyes. He couldn't tell if she meant it as a figure of speech or truth spoken plainly. The silence in the room stretched so long that the sound of boiling coffee became the only pulse of life between them. What will you do now? He finally asked. Ellie smiled, small, cold, knowing, the same smile Jackson had once mistaken for forgiveness. Now, she said, I'm going to bury him. But awake, 3 days later, the phone rang. It was Dr. Evans, the internist from the community clinic where Ellie went for checkups. His voice was too gentle, too careful. Miss Eleanor, I need you to come in today, please. Her legs trembled, but she dressed neatly, tied her scarf, and walked to the clinic with her usual quiet dignity. In the office, Dr. Evans waited with a face that had already said goodbye. We ran new tests, he began, and the results are not good. Ellie said nothing. She only watched him, as if waiting for him to confirm what she already knew. You have leukemia, he said softly. Advanced stage. I'm sorry, your immune system is failing. We estimate about 6 months. She didn't blink, her eyes fixed on a small patch of dampness on the wall, shaped like a bird. No tears, no fear. Do you understand what I'm saying? He asked. I understand, she said. How much it costs to die with dignity. He hesitated. There are treatment options. Chemotherapy. It might slow the progression. Does it kill me faster? Not necessarily. Then no, she said. I don't want death to find me in a hospital gown. Dr. Evans had no reply. In all his years, he had never seen anyone greet their own death with such composure. Ellie stood, gathered her purse, and paused before leaving the clinic. 6 months is enough, she told Dr. Evans, for what I have to do. It's more than enough. She walked home on purpose, not because she lacked money for a bus, but because she wanted the city to sink into her bones. Each step was a stitch tying her back to a life she had built from nothing. She crossed the corner where a car had nearly struck her years ago while she walked Jackson to preschool. She passed the market where she once scrubbed grimy restroom tiles for $40 a day. She waved at Mr. Theodore, the toothless man who ran the juice stand, and remembered everyone's name. At home she went straight to the small wooden box hidden beneath her bed. Inside lived a ragged notebook, torn receipts, yellowed clippings, faded letters, and the only photograph of Jackson as a child, still clinging to her leg in sleep. She traced his small face until the memory warmed her, then set the picture down and put a kettle on the stove. Steam rose and she murmured to the empty room, "No more praying, the work begins." Her first move was legal and perfunctory. She and Walter filed a preemptive complaint, not as a woman begging for mercy, but as a citizen demanding the law be honored. They reported the forgery, attached copies of the will and the suspicious account activity, and asked the court to temporarily freeze the bank account from which the withdrawals had been made. They invoked statutes against elder financial abuse. It was slow and tangled, but Walter, who had grown cynical with the years, dusted off old knowledge and navigated the loopholes for her. "Are you ready for what comes next?" he asked as they signed papers. "I was born ready," she said. "I just didn't know it." She bought a new notebook with a red cover and began a ledger of deeds, a final log, not for grieving but for record. On the first page she wrote in careful, deliberate letters, "To my son, Jackson, I delivered you from my body with pain. I gave you my life with love. You tore my dignity from me without blinking. This is not revenge. It is justice. Justice is all I have left to die in peace." In Rome. Jackson and Tanya kept up the show-filtered plates, posed smiles, the daily parade of curated happiness, yet the facade thinned. Tanya stopped sharing Jackson's bed most nights. Rhonda no longer bothered to feign warmth, her phone glued to her palm. Tension hummed under the lacquered surface. One night, rifling through emails for a flight confirmation, Jackson found an automatic backup, a hidden folder of Tanya's messages. At first he thought it junk, then he opened it and read lines that unstitched his sleep. "Tanya, we almost have everything. The idiot doesn't suspect a thing. Contact and the as soon as we're back, we leave him. Other party. What if he finds out? Tanya, I don't care. Let him rot. I'm not staying with someone who smells like a traumatized single mom." His stomach dropped. He closed the laptop, pretended to sleep, but that night his eyes would not rest. For the first time in years he thought of his mother, her voice calling "my little boy" even when he towered over her, her rice pudding, the laugh she shared over black and white sitcoms, the way she'd press a cool hand to his fevered brow. He wanted to call. He did not. Ellie expected nothing from him now. Tenderness had been traded for plans. She moved through offices, activated the right alerts, and filed the necessary suspicions with authorities. The system creaked, then shifted. An international alert was issued regarding the transfers. It would not mean immediate incarceration, but it would force accountability and complicate any plan to vanish with the funds. In the red notebook she wrote another line, neat and cold: "There is no justice more complete than that which is delivered without screaming. I will watch him lose everything without lifting a finger. Karma is not paid with violence. It is served with patience." The second betrayal did not shatter her. It hardened her colder, freer, remade. The mother who had pleaded and pleaded had died. In her place, a woman had awakened. It was only days before Jackson returned to the United States. Clueless about the earthquake waiting for him, he had pictured hell as fire, noise, and fury. He never imagined it could be the cold shame of a card declined on a cobblestone street, the mortification of being refused in front of tourists. It began with one denial at the payment terminal, then another. Within 48 hours he was stripped bare of cash and active accounts, watched by two women who now regarded him as a nuisance, picked off the pavement. Tanya screamed at him in the middle of a busy street, while people stopped and stared. "You shameless idiot. What did you do with the money? I told you not to trust your poverty-stricken mommy. Now you've ruined everything." Jackson stammered. There were no words adequate for what he couldn't yet understand: that accounts were frozen, that his name was tied to an international fraud inquiry, that he would have to present himself at the American embassy the next morning. That night, Rhonda looked at him with contempt. "I warned you, Tanya. This poor boy can't even wash dishes properly. I'm going to a hostel. I'm not staying in this dump." She left without a backward glance. Tanya followed. No farewells, no whispers of regret. Jackson sat alone in the hotel room with a half-packed suitcase and the hollow echo of betrayal. In Los Angeles, Ellie wove the last threads of her plan like a winter blanket. Everything fit. Walter helped compile documents to trigger an international capital freeze under the rubric of elder financial abuse. He called an old contact, Mr. Ernest, a federal agent in the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, and arranged to flag the transfers for mandatory review upon Jackson's entry to U.S. soil. It was not vengeance. It was law. It was consequence. In her red notebook she wrote, precise and without flourish, sometimes a mother's love must hurt not from hate, but as a lesson. What is permitted repeats, and then it rots. I did not birth a thief. The world made him one. If I must stop him, then I will. Brenda moved beside her through the procedures, no longer merely neighbor, but accomplice. Doesn't it hurt, Ellie? She asked once, quietly. Of course it hurts, Ellie said, like tearing off my own skin, but some wounds heal. The embassy meeting became a theater of shame. Jackson was ushered into a cold, windowless room with a young lawyer and a translator whose voice was clipped and mechanical. They told him there was an active complaint, that funds had been frozen by preemptive order, and that he would need to account for everything when he returned. He left the embassy deflated, the world collapsing around him. For the first time in a long time, he thought of his mother, her voice, her rice pudding, the way she'd press a cool hand to his fevered brow. He wanted to call, but could not find the courage. Finally, weakness pushed him to dial. Ellie was at her kitchen sink, rinsing black-eyed peas through the old strainer, as if nothing out of the ordinary was happening. She recognized his voice at once. His words tumbled. Mom, what did you do? They took everything. I'm alone. Tanya left. Rhonda left. They say you did this. Ellie breathed in. Her hand trembled on the phone, but not enough to drop it. Her voice came steady, controlled, from a place he no longer had access to. I didn't take anything from you, son. I just stopped what you were taking from me. Mom, they want to arrest me. You said you would always be there for me. I was, she said softly, until you stopped being there for yourself. Please help me. I don't know what to do. Learn. She hung up. No tears, no explanations, no apologies. That was all she had left to give. For the first time, Ellie allowed herself to accept a cruel but necessary truth. Her son needed to suffer to understand, because sometimes pain is the only teacher love could never be. That night, Ellie did not sleep, not because of guilt, but because she had something left to write. It wasn't a goodbye, it was her final testament. She opened her red notebook, turned to the last page, and began, My dearest Jackson, you were my reason for waking each morning, my fight, my pride, my breath. I gave you what I had and what I didn't. I went hungry so you could eat, lonely so you could feel loved, tired so you could rest, and I have no regrets. But somewhere along the way, you forgot who you were. You surrounded yourself with ghosts that smelled of expensive lies. They didn't kill me, Jackson. They forced me to wake up. I don't hate you. I couldn't. But I am no longer the woman who waits in silence for her son to remember her. Now, I am the one who teaches, even if it hurts. And if one day you truly repent, this letter will still be here. Not to save you, but so you can never say no one warned you. At the end, she drew a small heart, trembling but steady. It was the last sweetness she had left in her. Meanwhile, Jackson drifted through the streets of Rome like a ghost without a home. Some nights he slept in hostels. Some nights he didn't sleep at all. His money was gone, his friends gone, his women gone. Even his pride had abandoned him. He knew returning to the U.S. wouldn't be a homecoming. It would be a reckoning. So he bought a one-way ticket with the last euros he had, shivering in fear and shame, praying that maybe, somehow, she'd pick up the phone again. Back in Los Angeles, Ellie's body was failing, but her soul had never felt clearer. She had shaved her head before the chemo could steal her hair. Standing before the mirror with sewing scissors, she whispered, Now I look like who I am. Walter accompanied her to the doctor one last time. The results were final. The cancer was advancing fast. Ellie simply nodded. You know, she said quietly, I was never afraid to die. What hurt me was not being able to leave in peace. But now I can. That night, lying alone in bed, a sharp pain tore through her chest. She curled around it, holding herself, whispering her son's name, not as a cry for help, but as a goodbye. The silence that followed wasn't tragic. It was sacred, the calm before the collapse. the stillness after a storm that had finally spent its rage. When Jackson's plane touched down in the U.S., Ellie felt nothing, not excitement, not relief. She hadn't come to witness his fall with hatred. She came to close a circle. At nearly 70, her hands trembled, but not from fear. Pain was now part of her landscape, but so was peace. She had sold her blender, the big mirror in the living room, and a small gold ring Jackson once gave her as a child, just to afford this trip. The price didn't matter. Freedom had always cost more at the airport. Walter was waiting. He'd arrived a day earlier, arranged the paperwork, pulled the strings so Ellie could legally be present at the embassy when Jackson testified. The consular officer, himself raised by a single mother, had understood without needing many words. When she finally reached him, Walter removed his hat. "You don't look like a woman about to face her son." Ellie gave a faint smile, her gaze steady but distant. "And you," she said, "don't look like a man who ever retired." Ellie raised her hand gently, not to silence him, but to stop the flood of words that would mean nothing now. "Don't," she said softly. "Some goodbyes don't need speeches." Jackson's throat tightened. "I don't know what to say." "Then say nothing. Let silence do what words can't." They stood there, facing each other in the golden dusk of a Roman afternoon, mother and son, strangers tied by blood, years, and mistakes. The traffic hummed around them. People passed by without noticing the quiet storm, standing still in the middle of the street. Ellie looked at him, not with anger, but with a weary kind of mercy. "You know, Jackson," she said, "I used to dream of the man you could become, the one who'd bring light to this house that's carried so much shadow. But I also learned that not every seed grows where it's planted." He wiped his eyes with the back of his trembling hand. "I didn't mean for it to end like this." "Neither did I," she whispered, "but life isn't kind, and it isn't cruel. It just gives back what we give it. You gave it carelessness. Now it's your turn to learn what it takes to rebuild." She reached into her purse, pulled out a small rosary with missing beads, the one he used to play with as a boy, and placed it in his palm. "Keep it," she said. "It won't save you, but maybe it'll remind you of who you were before greed found you." He wanted to hug her, to say sorry, to beg, but something in her eyes, calm, resolved, eternal, told him that chapter was already written. She turned to leave. Her steps were slow but unwavering. The gait of someone who had already made peace with everything, even pain. Jackson watched her go, his lips trembling around a word that never came out. He wanted to run after her, but his legs felt like stone. So he stood there, alone, watching the only person who had ever truly loved him walk away, not in anger, but in closure. As Ellie disappeared into the crowd, the evening light wrapped around her like a halo, an old woman with nothing left to lose, carrying only peace in her hands. That night, she wrote her final entry in the red notebook. "Justice isn't revenge. Revenge dies when the heart does, but justice survives, even after the hands that carried it are gone. If he ever finds his way back to himself, he'll understand that I never punished him. I just stopped protecting him from the truth." She closed the notebook, placed it on her bedside table, and smiled faintly. Ellie had finished her story. Jackson's was just beginning. Jackson froze on the curb, the bag of donuts trembling in his hand. The sight of her small, frail, but radiating an unshakable calm, tore something open inside him. For a long moment, he didn't move. The world around him blurred into silence. He wanted to run to her, to fall to his knees, to beg for one last chance, but he didn't. He didn't deserve her doorstep, not yet. He stood there, watching, as the morning sunlight painted her in gold, the way it used to when he was little, and she'd stand by the window calling him in for dinner. Ellie didn't see him at first. She was looking at the children, her lips curving into the faintest smile. When she finally turned her head, her eyes met his across the street. For a heartbeat, time stopped. No words, no gestures, just recognition, not of a son, not of a mother, but of two souls who had burned each other down, and now stood in the quiet ashes. Jackson's throat tightened. He lifted the paper bag slowly, a shy offering, as if to say, "I remember." Ellie didn't wave. She didn't call out. She simply nodded once, a small, tired nod that held more forgiveness than 1,000 words could. Then she turned her gaze back to the children, her hand gently stroking the armrest of her rocking chair. Jackson understood. That was her way of saying, "It's enough. You can go." He placed the bag carefully on the edge of the fence, the way he used to leave her groceries when she worked double shifts and came home late. Then he walked away, slowly, without looking back. The morning swallowed him whole. from her chair. Ellie watched the donuts sway gently in the breeze, the bag rustling like an old lullaby. She smiled, not with joy, but with peace. The circle was closed. Later that afternoon, Brenda came by with soup and found the bag untouched. Ellie was asleep in the chair, her hands folded over her lap, the faintest smile still lingering on her face. The radio was still on, playing a slow blues tune, the kind she always said sounded like forgiveness. And there, beside her red notebook, was one last note written in shaky handwriting. To the boy who made me a mother, I forgive you not because you asked, but because I refused to leave this world with hate in my heart. Whatever you do next, do it with decency. That will be enough. When the sun set, the wind moved softly through the open window, carrying the scent of lavender and old paper. In another part of the city, Jackson sat alone on a bench, eating one of the donuts he'd left behind. Tears ran silently down his cheeks. For the first time in his life, the sweetness hurt. And somewhere, between the fading blues on the radio and the whisper of the evening air, he finally understood what real love costs. A beautiful and emotionally complete ending, quiet, cinematic, and deeply human. Here's a polished rewrite of your version, keeping the exact tone and structure but enhancing rhythm, imagery, and emotional flow, perfect for narration or YouTube style storytelling, especially if you want it to sound more immersive and professional for a life story channel. One of the children brought Ellie a small flower picked from the park. She smiled and hugged him as if he were her own. Across the street, Jackson watched, silent, unseen. A knot tightened in his throat. He walked slowly to her porch, placed the bag of donuts there, and left without saying a word. Ellie didn't look up, but she felt him. She didn't open the door. Not that day. In the weeks that followed, Jackson came back, always at the same time, always quietly. Sometimes he left flowers, sometimes pastries, sometimes a note, never signed. He never knocked. He never asked to come in. He knew he had no right. He was only paying a debt whose balance he could never know. Then, one night, Ellie took her red notebook and opened it to the last page. Her hands trembled, but her words did not. My son, love is not demanded, it's given. And if you've learned that, then you are not lost anymore. Don't look for me when I'm gone. I'll be in every mistake you choose not to repeat, in every act of kindness you do without expecting anything in return. If you wish to forgive yourself, begin with others. And if one day, you see your mother in the eyes of another woman, don't fail her. That will be my redemption. She signed her full name, folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and wrote in bold black ink, for Jackson. The morning Ellie stopped breathing was bright. The sun streamed through the window, gentle and warm. On her lap were her red notebook, the envelope, and a handmade blanket she'd knitted long ago. The neighbors found her, surrounded by flowers, the same ones the children had brought. Her face held a peace too real to be faked. No drama, no cries, only the calm. After a lifetime of storms. Walter arrived first. He looked at her, closed her eyes, and whispered a prayer. Brenda organized the wake, simple, filled with love. No expensive wreaths, only park flowers, children's drawings, and her favorite blues songs. No one called Jackson, but he knew, he felt it, the shift in the wind, the silence inside his chest. He ran to the house. The door was open. No one stopped him. No one spoke. He walked to where his mother lay and knelt beside her. Her hands were cold. Next to her was the envelope. His name. He opened it and read every word aloud, softly, to no one but her. And then he cried, not with noise, not with regret, but with silence. The same kind of silence she had carried all her life. In the corner stood a wooden box. Inside, a photo of him as a child, smiling. On the back, in her handwriting, I still believe in you, son. Jackson pressed the photo to his chest, walked outside, and sat in her rocking chair. He looked at the sky and understood, he had lost his mother, but maybe, just maybe, he could still find himself. Days later, the neighbors said the man with the donuts had moved into the house. He brought no new furniture, no luxuries, no visitors, only a chair, a red notebook, and a single framed photo. Those who leave make space. Those who stay fill it, sometimes with memory, and sometimes with redemption. Did you like the story? And where are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave a super thanks. It really helps me bring you more life stories like this one. With love and respect, I'll see you in the next story.